Did God lie? I mean, did God lie? In the day that you eat thereof, you will
You
surely
will
die.
surely die.
And
Oh,
yeah,
well, that's some people thought that well, they interpret the whole story differently. Um, you're talking about the testimony of truth, in which it says Adam, the serpent, was saying, "You will not die. The day you eat of it, your eyes will be opened, and you'll know the difference between good and evil." And that's what happens, right?
right.
And so they say, "Well, who's the serpent there?" The serpent was Christ. And how do you know the serpent was Christ? If you know the beginning of the Gospel of John, it says, "As the serpent was lifted up in the wilderness, so the Son of Man will be lifted up." So Christ is compared to the serpent, which the serpent that is on the staff of Asclepius, the healer, the god of healing in antiquity. You still have the medical symbol of the Cassideus, the symbol of medicine with two snakes on it. That's for the ancient, god of medicine. And Jesus is there compared to the healer God who heals the world. But that story you talked about turns upside down. But Derek, I was saying, what's wrong with these other gospels? The Gospel of Thomas, it's just 14 sayings of Jesus, and half of them are exactly the same as you'll find them in Matthew and Luke. Blessed are the poor, the parable of the mustard seed, the parable of the sower, right? They're just the same sayings. Love your brother. What's wrong with that? There are other sayings there, however, that are, I would say, mystical sayings. And they say, the one I mentioned, if you bring forth what is within you, what you bring forth will save you. The secret of the Gospel of Thomas, they say, is the secret of the kingdom of God. But what they mean by it is the kingdom of God is not a place in heaven. And the kingdom of God is not coming at the end of time, like the world is coming to an end and then will be the kingdom of God. It's not spatial and it's not temporal. It's a metaphor. It's a metaphor for insight that within you, there's a connection to God. You have within you a connection to God. All of us have a connection to God of which we may be completely unaware. How do we get that connection? We read Genesis. It says God created Adam, which means humanity in Hebrew, in his image. He created, in the image of God, he created him. So what's the image of God? Well, you can't make an image of God in the Hebrew Bible, right? You can't. You're forbidden to make an image. The only image that the prophets use about God, I think of Ezekiel 1. Ezekiel, the prophet, says, "I saw the Lord sitting on a throne." What did he look like? Do you remember that passage, Ezekiel 1?
Yeah, one where he's seated on a throne and there's the will within the will, or?
Well, the throne is moving. Yes, the wheel, that's a wonderful thing. Ezekiel saw the wheel way up in the middle of the air. But on the throne, if you look at the throne, Ezekiel chapter 1, you don't really see a being, a human form. It says something that sort of looked like a human form, but they don't want to say he looked like a human. But they say, what do you see? You see light. You see rainbows. You see fire. You see lightning. You see glory. The Greek, the Hebrew word kavod means shining. Right. So you see jewels and rainbows and fire and a sea of crystal. You see lightning. So the image of God that you can use as a Hebrew prophet is not a visual image. You can't make that. You can't make an image. It's light. Because light is invisible. Light is a spiritual energy. It's not a physical energy. Well, it is a physical energy in a way, but it's also like an invisible energy, and it's a metaphor for the divine energy that brought the universe into being. So when rabbis would read Genesis 1 in the first century, they'd say, God made you in their image. What? What image? Well, it's not the way you look. It's It's a kind of energy that brought the world into being. And that energy is in you. That light, we call it light, just it's a metaphor for that spiritual energy. And it's in you, it's in me, it's in everything, because nothing exists apart from the divine energy that brought the world into being. So that's what the Gospel of Thomas teaches as the secret. The secret is that you have within you a kind of spiritual energy hidden. You may not even know it's there, but it's connecting you with the divine source from which you came and which we all come. And so what you're supposed to discover as the secret of this kingdom of God is you're not just Derek Lambert. I'm not just Elaine Pagels. We are beings that came out of the light that came into being in the beginning of time.
And that's the Gnostic.
And that's a teaching which actually is the foundation of Jewish mysticism. If you look at Kabbalah, have you looked at any of that?
I have not delved into the Kabbalah, no.
Well, it's a deep well. But writings of Kabbalah you were forbidden to write it down. And because foolish people can be told, well, God is within you, so you're God. I mean, no. You could take it in a very naive and foolish way, right? So they said you shouldn't write this down for people who are not spiritually mature. But when they are, you can teach them about the divine light that's within every being and within everything in the universe. And in the Gospel of Thomas, Jesus says, I am the light that is before everything. Everything comes forth from me. Everything returns to me. Split a piece of wood, and I am there. Lift up a rock, and you will find me. That energy is in everything. Rocks, stones, stars, animals, us. And then the Gospel of Thomas teaches that's who you need to know who you are. It's not just this individual person with this gender, with this background, with this family. You are part of this astonishing spiritual energy from which everything comes. And when you realize that, you know what? You may not need a church.
Interesting.
You may not even need Jesus because he comes from the same light. You can find a way to God on your own. You can be a freelancer.
If I may ask a couple of probing questions on this is interesting because it makes me wonder two things. The Gospel of Thomas seems to be dated pretty early in your estimation, at least, somewhere after 70, but where would you put it?
It was known to people who were writing in about the year 150. So most likely it was, we don't know for sure.
Right.
Early second century, between 90 and say 120 or 30, we just don't know for sure. So some people want to say it's very late, but late tradition can still preserve oral tradition in the ancient world.
That's true.
It doesn't mean anything about how authentic it is. It's just that you're not supposed to tell secret teaching, and that was supposed to be Jesus's secret teaching, which every rabbi has.
Could you tell me if? Oh, I got a quiet echo. There we go. The Gospel of John and Paul. Is there this Gnostic teaching there? I mean, obviously, I am the resurrection. I am the life. Like that's a pretty bold statement to make. Can you tell us any Gnostic ideas? And I use the term Gnostic. I know there's this debate of was there really a Gnostic sect? Well, there were various sects with strange teachings that sound very Gnosis-like. But do you find Gnosticism inside of the New Testament canon? And then I'd like to probe another interesting question your way.
Many people have. The word Gnostic becomes a dirty word. It's derogatory. It just means these are the bad gospels. Don't read those. I was told yesterday by a former evangelical friend that my books were always, he was always told they were dangerous because they can change your point of view. and these texts, Gnosis means insight, and it means insight about who you are, not so much who Jesus is. But if you know who you are, according to the Gospel of Thomas, you can find your way back to God because you have a secret link that you can follow inside yourself. And you don't, that's why you may not need a church. That's why you may not need a priest, a bishop, doctrines, Bible even. This is before there's a church, and before there's a New Testament, and before there's a Bible, the kind we have, and before there are Christian doctrines about the nature of Jesus. This was a mystical teaching that they say Jesus taught. And Jews have taught it for thousands of years. He was, of course, a Jewish teacher. If you read the New Testament in Greek, they're saying rabbi, where we read teacher.
So this makes me want to ask about the Gospel of Thomas. When the disciples ask him, and this is an interesting verse, when will be the repose of the dead, the resurrection? And he says, look around. It's already happened. And they don't see anything happen. It's like, well, what do you mean it's already happened? The reason I ask is there is a group of people who want to suggest that the resurrection, like they, of course, can't, the whole canon is speaking, they're fundamentalists in their thinking. So everything connects and all the doctrines are all teaching the same thing. They believe the end happened in 70 AD.
Oh.
And so they're called full preterists. But this Gnostic idea, I told him, I was like, why don't you actually read the Gospel of Thomas to support your claim? Well, the reason is it goes outside of what they consider canon, but it's like in this book, he tells you the resurrection already happened. And I kind of wanted your thoughts on this, but do you think the argument of cognitive dissonance, if you will, might be what's happened within the Gospels? They anticipate an end to happen. It's supposed to end. They're expecting a world actual changing in this world change.
Yeah.
And it took a spin, and kind of like what we saw with the Millerite movement in the 1800s. The end is going to happen. And when it didn't happen, half the group said it did. It was spiritual though. And the other half said, yeah. And the other half was like, well, we got the date wrong because nothing really happened. Do you think that's what happened with Christianity within the New Testament? And of course, the reason that the church continued, it never really ended. What was expected never happened. Do you think that's why they maybe spiritualized stuff in John, realized eschatology as they call it?
Yes, I think that's a very good possibility. And it may be also why others say, well, what's resurrection? It doesn't mean the body gets out of the grave. It's a metaphor for spiritual awakening, what the Buddhists call awakening. When you become aware of spiritual reality, then you come out of being basically dead to the spiritual world. You come alive spiritually. So they said that's what it means. And you can consider yourself already raised from the dead. But Orthodox Christians said, no, it has to mean that the body was in the grave and then it's out. But that becomes a doctrine of the Orthodox Church. The resurrection of the dead means the resurrection of the body.
I wonder if they're right about it, only because they're pulling from Genesis, Adam, Paul, and he's saying, look, the first Adam all died, second Adam all will be made alive. And whether you make a universalist claim here or whatever, the point is like, does Paul think that actual physical death's what entered the world through Adam? And does he mean actual resurrection? And what does he mean? I mean, this is interpretation,
Well, we don't know. But if you look at, for example, at the 4th chapter of Mark, where Jesus says he's teaching the disciples, I'm only telling you the mystery of the kingdom of God. And then he doesn't tell them. The Gospel of Thomas says, well, I'm going to tell you what he really said.